And good evening. Thanks for joining us. An effort to repeal Obamacare with no consensus on a plan to replace it failed in the Senate today, and the president continued his attacks on his own attorney general. We'll have more on all of that tonight. But we begin with the president's pronouncement on a major military policy decision, a pronouncement he made on Twitter this morning. Quote, "After consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. The military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail. Thank you." 3 tweets out of the blue. No official public announcement, no explanation of what will happen to the thousands of transgender troops currently serving in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Will they be kicked out? The White House press briefing today, no answers to that question. Sarah Huckabee Sanders could not or would not answer questions about whether current service members will be removed.
The president has a lot of support for all Americans and certainly wants to protect all Americans at all times. The president's expressed concern since this Obama policy came into effect, but he's also voiced that this is a very expensive and disruptive policy, and based on consultation that he's had with his national security team, came to the conclusion that it erodes military readiness and unit cohesion, and made the decision based on that. The decision is based on a military decision. It's not meant to be anything more than that.
At a White House event, an attempt to get some clarity from the president later went ignored.
How do you decide your policy on transgender people in the military?
You go ahead. She's very rude.
So all we have on this policy change that will profoundly affect thousands of service members' lives are the president's 3 tweets, which mention the, quote, tremendous medical costs and disruption of having transgender service members in the military. What he means by disruption is really anybody's guess. Keeping him honest on the so-called tremendous medical costs, last year a study commissioned by the Defense Department estimated those costs to be between $2.4 and $8.4 million a year out of the nearly $50 billion the Defense Department spends annually on health care. Again, the high estimate is $8.4 million, and as the Washington Post points out, the military spends more than $41 million a year just on Viagra, according to analysis by the Military Times. As for Sarah Huckabee Sanders insists that this was a military decision and nothing more, keeping them honest, if that is true, why were the heads of the 4 branches of the military caught off guard by the tweets, according to a U.S. military official? Beyond that, there's a politics issue and a perception issue that can't be ignored. Politico reports the sudden transgender ban was in part an effort to save a House spending bill that was in jeopardy because of GOP infighting over the issue of the government paying medical costs for transgender troops. And an Axios political reporter quotes a Trump administration official saying the ban would force Democrats in Rust Belt states to own the issue of defending transgender service members in the 2018 elections, which the White House believes would hurt those Democrats. Either motivation amounts to using transgender people as political pawns or as wedges. It also may not be a coincidence the president suddenly did this at a time he's getting criticism from conservative supporters about his treatment of Attorney General Sessions, essentially throwing some red meat to conservatives upset at the president. The irony, of course, is this president waved the flag for equal treatment of gay and transgender people from time to time throughout his campaign, portraying himself as a protector of equal rights for all. At the very least, a ban on transgender people in the military is a broken campaign promise.
LGBT is starting to like Donald Trump very much like, I will tell you. You tell me, who's better for gays? Who is better? Tell me, who's better for the gay community and who's better for women than Donald Trump? Believe me, the LGBT community, the gay community, the lesbian community, they are so much in favor of what I've been saying over the last 3 or 4 days. As your president, I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens.
As you know, Mr. Trump never served in the military. Some lawmakers who did have weighed in, including Senator John McCain, who said in a statement that regardless of gender identity, any American who wants to and is able to serve should be treated as the patriots they are. Earlier, I spoke with Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's a Purple Heart recipient. She was an Army Black Hawk helicopter pilot who was shot down in Iraq, lost her legs, and partially used her right arm. Here's what Senator Duckworth, CNN is reporting tonight that the service chiefs who represent the 4 branches of the military were actually caught off guard by the president's Twitter announcement.
This is very, very typical of this president who blunders forward in areas where he has no expertise. I've said before, he is not fit to be commander-in-chief, and this tweet shows that he has reinforced my opinion of him.
When the White House says this was purely a military decision, that having transgender people serve, quote, disrupts military readiness and unit cohesion, do you believe that?
I absolutely do not believe that, Anderson. We've had transgender people who have served, tens of thousands of them have served over the course of our military's history, and I don't know why the president is doing this. If anything, what he's doing is disruptive to unit cohesion.
I mean, is this about politics? This is about just appealing to his base?
I would think that this is about appealing to his base, because it's certainly not about military readiness. And the facts and figures that he quote are blatantly wrong. He says it's going to be too expensive when, you know, the cost estimate for the healthcare of transgender people is around, just in 2015, 2016, 5.6 million. The Pentagon in the same time period spent 41 million on Viagra. So if you want to talk about costs, there are other places where you can cut.
I mean, the fact that the White House has no answer to the question of what's going to happen to transgender members who are currently serving, does that make any sense to you? I mean, I would think that would have been something that was figured out before announcing this.
Well, isn't this typical of this administration, Anderson? Frankly, they move forward and they have not thought anything out. They just come up with these terrible ideas that actually are harmful for our nation, and in this case, harmful for the greatest military on the face of the earth. Our military, who are willing to die to protect the values enshrined in our Constitution, deserve far better than this type of policy, and especially one that has not even been thought out.
I want to play for our viewers something that the president said just last night, which was directed to veterans, some remarks he made.
You carried out your duty with honor, courage, and devotion, and with your sacrifice, you earned our freedom. In my administration, we will always protect those who protect us. Believe me, we will protect you because you have protected us.
I mean, is there some irony in that he said that yesterday? And I mean, is the president today protecting people who protected us?
I think that his tweet today made a lie of what he said last night.
You know, Axios spoke to someone in the White House about this decision who said that this forces Democrats in Rust Belt states take ownership of the issue, basically saying that blue-collar voters who might now be on opposition to this move from the president. You're from a Rust Belt state. How do you respond to that?
Well, when I'm out in my home state of Illinois and I travel, what people are talking about are the promises that he has not kept. They're not talking about this issue. They're talking about the fact that he is allowing the Dakota Access Pipeline and to be made with foreign steel, steel made in Russia. They're talking about the fact that he spends $3 million a weekend to go to Mar-a-Lago at a time when we have counties in the southern part of my state that don't have enough sheriff's deputies who are on duty. That people are not talking about this issue.
So to the thousands of transgender members who are serving now in the military, what can you say to them tonight?
Well, I will be fighting on their behalf, and what I'm going to say to them and to the American people is that when I was bleeding to death in my helicopter after that RPG ripped through the cockpit of the aircraft, and an American came to save my life, it didn't matter to me if they were gay, if they were straight, if they were transgendered. It only mattered that they wore the uniform of the United States military. And I will always remember that. If you're willing to serve this country in uniform and you're willing to lay down your life to protect it, you deserve to be able to do that. And so many more Americans, including our president, has never worn the uniform, and he just needs to back off, because I will stand up and fight for our transgender and all of our military men.
Senator Duckworth, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots to talk about. Joining me is Matt Lewis, Kirsten Powers, Dana Bash in Washington, Jeffrey Toobin, and April Ryan. Dan, I mean, is this just about politics? Try to either distract from Russia or Jeff Sessions or the healthcare news or feeding red meat to the base?
It's almost impossible to imagine that it isn't. Now, I've had White House sources deny that today, but it really does defy any sort of logic that there is any other reason. There's some reporting that and some questions about whether it was conservatives in the House who were out to the president to try to get him to do this himself, so that because they felt like they were going to lose the issue legislatively as part of the budget. That is possible, but again, it fits the same.
What they were focusing on was more medical costs, not a total ban on transgender people.
That's exactly right, and so that kind of brings me to the next point, is that even people who were reluctant to have taxpayer dollars pay for any kind of medical treatment for a transition, they did not expect that the president would just full on reverse this allowing or put a ban on transgenders in the military. Not anybody on Capitol Hill, according to Barbara Starr, the people who, despite what the White House is saying, who are in charge of this, who wear the uniform, and so it was a real stunner. Never mind the question of how he did it, just random tweets without any interpretation, without any explanation, without any never mind, a policy paper explaining why. It was absolutely kind of impulse policy making at its best. Jeff
Toobin, I mean, legally, President, can he do this? Because I mean, a lot of people who were transgendered in the military were essentially encouraged last year under the Obama policy to come forward and identify themselves, and now those who have come forward and identified themselves, I assume under this policy, can maybe be fired.
Well, there certainly will be lawsuits. No doubt about it. The ACLU has already put out a call for potential plaintiffs who want to bring cases. The problem with this change, and obviously we're going to have to see precisely how it's spelled out and applied, is that courts give the military a great deal of deference in terms of how they organize themselves, what they view as militarily necessary, deference on issues like unit cohesions. There's a great reluctance among courts to second guess that. That's why most of the don't ask, don't tell challenges failed. It was only when Congress and the President Obama, changed the policy that the policy changed. The courts were not nearly as helpful as they were on same-sex marriage. So I think lawsuits, they will certainly be filed, but I think they're likely to be long shots. This is a political and military issue more than a issue for the court.
Matt, do you think this is about politics more than really military issues?
I think that, look, there is an argument. We've had this argument before with gays in the military about unit cohesion, about whether or not we're focused on social engineering versus military readiness. But I don't think that's what this is, because it's apropos of nothing. Like, there was no impetus for that debate. This was, seemed to come out of nowhere, and the only rationale is political. And I think the most, you listed a few of the scenarios, I think the most compelling for me is that you finally now have conservatives, people like Breitbart and Gingrich and others, who are helping saying, lay off of Jeff Sessions, Ann Coulter, Rush Limbaugh. And now all of a sudden Donald Trump does something that social conservatives, that culture warriors would love. Seems a little coincidental to me.
Yeah, Kirsten, Zeke Miller from Time tweeted that a White House official told him the administration was thrilled that this was getting so much coverage from the media. Does it distract from whether it's Russia investigations or Jeff Sessions criticism by conservatives of the president?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the sad thing is that transgender people have become the new boogeyman for social conservatives. So now I guess they've lost the battle on gay marriage, and so now they've moved on to transgender people. And you can see in the way this came out that there really was no serious argument that transgender people are causing any problems in the military. It's that the cost is too much. And yet the military spends less than 1% of their budget dealing with healthcare costs, of their healthcare budget, dealing with healthcare related to transgender people. They spend 5 times as much on Viagra than they spend on dealing with health issues related to transgender people. So even the argument that they're putting forth is a false argument. It's actually not that costly in terms of their overall budget, which, by the way, is massive.
I just want to add to what you said, Matt, on the politics side of this, that when you have a president who's 35%, basically he's got his base that is still supporting him. And the fact is that, and I've spent a couple days on Capitol Hill this week, you see the Republican anger about what the president is doing to Jeff Sessions, who effectively brought Donald Trump, the conservative base, handed it to him when he endorsed Trump back during the campaign. And so now you have the president trying to reach out and say, oh, no, don't be mad about that. Please, remember, I've got you on this.
In April, I mean, to Kirsten's point, this was an argument that was made first about allowing African Americans to serve in the armed forces equally in units that weren't segregated. Obviously, it was made about gay and lesbians, and now it's on transgender people.
You know, you hit the nail squarely, Anderson. In 1948, Harry Truman abolished segregation in the U.S. military. He abolished it. And the federal government, that was the first piece of the federal government to really start opening up to others. And for this to happen now, many years later, it's sad. And this is a community, Anderson, I'm sure, as you know. There are many people who are very concerned. And I brought up a question today in the White House briefing room that kind of played off of Major Garrett's question about TRICARE and health care for transgender military personnel. And there was a concern when President-elect Donald Trump was basking in the glory of his win, Hillary Clinton. Many in the transgender community were concerned about ACA changing over to Trump Care, what it would look like with gender reassignment. They said, you know, if we got top done now, how could we get the bottom done? We don't know what tomorrow brings. So this community has been concerned about this president for a long time, and now this just adds more fuel to the fire. And going back to your original point, it seems like it is red meat for his supporters, but it's also a deflection, I believe, from the big issue as well. This is a real issue, but it is deflection. He likes to throw things out there when, you know, something is bigger than he wants.
We're going to continue the conversation next. Also had the president